to Bostonian Rap. My name is Rachel Miselman. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest and a very old friend, Dexter Van Zile. He's done a tremendous amount in the field of journalism. He has quite an impressive body of work. He used to work for camera, and he did some very good things for camera, and now he is similarly performing, that is, at a high level for the Middle East Forum. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different issues. We're going to talk about faith. We're going to talk about the lack of tolerance that some people have toward others. We're going to talk about a very specific type of bigotry, anti-Semitism. And what we want to do is not just present anti-Semitism as a particular form of bigotry, which of course it is, but also tie it to the larger picture, and that is when a particular group is being targeted, ultimately that's not good for anybody. The public space should be a place where everyone can convene. So, Dexter?
Hi, it's nice to see you again.
It is so nice to see you. For those of you at home who have been following me for a while, you're going to be like, oh, Dexter, I remember Dexter. For those of you who are new to this show, Dexter had been appearing on my show fairly frequently between 2014, maybe even earlier, and 2019, I think, was your last appearance. So welcome back, welcome home. It's great to have you. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay. For many years, I worked for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. And I worked,
camera.
Yeah, that was camera, and I worked for them from about 2006 until March of 2022. In March of 2022, I moved over and I became editor of a website, the managing editor of Focus on Western Islamism, which is published and produced by the Middle East Forum, which was founded by Daniel Pipes. And Daniel,
it's a think tank.
Yeah, it's a think tank. And one of the things that we do, and one of the main premises of our publication is that there is a distinct difference between Islamism, which is an authoritarian, totalitarian political agenda, and the religious faith of Islam.
Sure.
And essentially that's really, I think, one of the things that we've been, helping even, people in the Muslim community actually get that message out. And so one of the things that we've done recently is I've interviewed former Islamists, Umar Lee and also Ismail Royer, who were two young Muslim men who grew up in St. Louis. They were converts to Islam, who basically either, Umar was a Salafist and Ismail Royer was actually got involved in the jihadist movement overseas. And they essentially abandoned that movement once they realized just where it was headed. And Ismail Royer is one of these people that has argued that essentially Islamism is a modernist ideology that has its roots more in the French Revolution than it does in Islam. And ultimately, Muslims in the United States, they want to be able to practice their faith. And in order to be able to do that, they're going to adhere to the constitutional rights that they have and also respect other people's constitutional rights as well. And I think that's really, and I was so proud to be able to do that because essentially I want to be able to, one of the reasons why I work at Focus on Western Islamism is because I want to basically be able to promote this notion of people from various religious groups being able to live together under a pluralistic, constitutional, and democratic order.
Peacefully, respectfully.
Absolutely.
And I'm really glad that you made that distinction from the onset, because there is, well, not even that there's a world of difference. There is Islam, Muslims, practitioners, adherents to the Islam faith. That has nothing to do with Islamism. And you, like I said, you made that distinction, and that's important. And I think that that's a conversation that you don't hear too much in this country.
Right, it was a difficult conversation, I think, for a lot of people to have. particularly in the early years after 9/11.
Right, because you want to be
Right.
respectful of the Muslim community. You want to recognize all the wonderful contributions that Muslims have made to communities here in Boston, throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, throughout the United States.
Right. When I talked to Umar Lee and Ismail Royer, one of the things that it became perfectly clear to me is that their participation in Islam as a religious faith was a profoundly important aspect of who they were as human beings. These were young men that had a difficult time kind of making their way through life. And what happened was that they participated in local mosque life.
Sure.
And it provided them with a sense of order and ability to be able to.
And they found a family. And
Right.
that's important to say.
Right.
So whether it is Islam
Right.
or it could be Christianity, it could be Buddhism,
Right.
it could be Judaism, Hinduism, a lot of people find, I don't want to use the word safe place, but for lack of a better phrase, they find a safe place, they find a family, they find purpose.
Right.
And they become centered. So it's very important that, you know, people who are watching understand that the distinction that is being made here is between Islam and Islamism.
Yeah.
And the two really, they just don't have anything to do with one another. And I lived in France, as you know, for 6 years. And so that's a conversation,
Right.
you know, because Islam is the second largest faith. And so that in France, as
Right.
you know, and so people have talked a lot about,
Yeah.
you know, the extremism.
Right. And one of the difficulties
And then
is that when
Muslim.
political leaders, when they are
Islam.
looking for people to essentially negotiate with and talk to in the larger Muslim community, one of the things that we have documented time and time again at Focus on Western Islamism is that it is the Islamists who are able to present themselves as the legitimate representatives of the entire Muslim community. And the problem is that politicians, being who and what they are, they will basically take the first credible approach and say, okay, this is the person that
They
we're going
don't
to do.
ask questions.
And the problem is that they're uncomfortable asking these questions, because if they challenge Islamism, then what happens is that the Islamists have become very effective at deploying the Islamophobia charge against anybody that will actually say, well, wait a minute, we have a problem with some of these elements of the Islamist ideology and its practice in democracies. Then what happens is that when you start to confront that, that's when you were subjected to the allegation of Islamophobia.
Sure.
And the thing is that if you look at any religion in the West, it is generally subjected to a pretty robust critique. Judaism has been, subjected to a robust critique in part by many Jews. Christianity, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, was subjected to a robust critique by people like Jules Isaac, who wrote, Teachings of Contempt, and said, and he was a French Jew that said, look, we got to take a look at some of the things that Christians have said about Jews over the years. And so, but the thing is that in order for people to practice their faith in the West, the Muslim faith, they're going to have some pretty difficult conversations about what is traditional Islam, what is going to work in the world today. And the thing is that when you direct that allegation of Islamophobia, which in some instances has actually been leveled at Reform Muslims themselves, or Muslims who are trying to update or modernize their faith.
That's an important point to make. When I lived in France, I had friends of different backgrounds, different faiths, and one of my friends happened to be a beautiful human being. Her name was Huda, and Huda was, a French girl. She was of Moroccan descent, and she was of the Islam faith. She was a Muslim, practicing Muslim, and she told me that the extremists who wanted to attach themselves to Islam, they would, sometimes harass her because she didn't wear the hijab, or that, she lived a certain lifestyle. She was very proud of being a Muslim, as well she should have been. But she had to navigate, I think, unnecessarily rough and difficult waters. I would say cruel waters even, because you know, there is bigotry toward Muslims
Right.
in France, a lot of bigotry, and it's disgusting. And then she had to deal with extremists
Right.
who,
And the
who
problem
wanted
is,
to attach
and
themselves
that
to Islam.
anti-Muslim bigotry, the direct bigotry towards the direct Muslim faith and the Muslims themselves, that direct bigotry, rather than directing it, and I don't want bigotry even directed at Islamists either, but the thing is that when you have a critique of Islamism and you end up, it spills over into basically a bigoted attack on Islam itself, what that does is that marginalizes the people who in the Muslim community that want to reform their faith and marginalize the Islamists themselves.
Well, who just want to ask questions, that, you know,
Right.
they're proud to be Muslim, but they have questions.
Right.
You know, just like there are Jews
Right.
who are proud to be Jewish, but they want to ask questions about
Right.
Judaism. They don't want to just be fed their faith. They want to consume it thoughtfully.
Right.
You know, and the same thing with Christians, Buddhists, and Hindus. You know, so again, I want to impress upon people watching at home, this is a conversation that's very new to the United States. And I would say that you are on the forefront, you've been on the forefront on a lot of difficult but necessary conversations. And this is, no, it's true. And we're going to talk about that. You're my hero.
Thank you.
But this is one of the latest, I don't know if I want to say battles, but this is one of the latest missions that you've undertaken, where you say, look, we have to take on the extremists,
Right.
wherever they come from. And it just so happens that there are some that, again,
Right.
want to
Yeah.
adhere to
Yeah.
to the Islam
Yeah,
faith.
and I do wear it, you know, kind of as a self-serving badge of honor that I've been vilified by white supremacists as well.
Well, that's
And
right.
I- yeah.
And I want people to hear that. Like,
Right.
so there are people on the political right,
Right.
who have gone after you because you have really said, look, well, you have your areas of focus, and you have been a firm and steadfast, true friend to the Jewish community, and for that I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You really have taken a stand against bigotry of all kinds, and you've also been able, and I find this particularly impressive, you've been able to pivot and say, look, it's because I consider everyone worthy of respect and everyone should be able to live with dignity, that if we have extremists or we have loud voices that are pumping toxicity into the public space, we need to address this.
Well, here's where I am a Roman Catholic and I believe in Jesus, okay? But I also want to make something clear, is that I also regard myself as a son of Abraham, okay? Because all three of the Abrahamic faiths, we argue amongst one another about the elements of our origins, okay? And one of the things that we disagree upon is, you know, which brother was actually going to be sacrificed up by Abraham up on Mount Moriah. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that we all agree on is that God stayed Abraham's hand, okay? And one of the disciplines that I've had to actually learn in my personal life, and also is to stay the hand of hate and hostility in my own heart. And the thing is that I actually think that there is room in all of our faiths to basically remind ourselves that, yes, indeed, we need to stay the hand of Abraham. And I think, and once we recognize that, then it's like, okay, maybe we can live together under a common,
broad banner.
a constitutional order where we all have our rights, and that we basically struggle with our own traditions and figure out a way to apply it into the modern world without, frankly, demonizing one another, or and using the other as a foil or a scapegoat to prove just how virtuous we are. And the thing is as a Christian, one of the things that I've always, I pointed out Islamist anti-Semitism and confronted, the roots, the anti-Judaic elements that are present in, some of the Muslim traditions. But the problem is that I could never, ever be like, and sometimes maybe I went too far, but it was like, but Christianity had these roots as well, okay, or had these problems as well. And so that was, I think, a really crucial element of one of the things that I always understood. The thing that always bothered me is that the Christians always kind of turned a blind eye to the issue of anti-Semitism when it dealt with Islamism, because Bassem Tibi wrote a book called Islamism and Islam, and one of the things that he outlines, he says, is that anti-Semitism is one of the central elements of this movement. And I think that shouldn't be a surprise, because anytime you
and again, just for people at home watching, we're talking about Islamism.
Right.
Not Islam, but
right.
Islamism.
But it shouldn't be a surprise, because anytime you have, and what Islamism is it's basically like communism or fascism. It's basically, it is a grand agenda to reform or change the human condition. It's a grand project. And whenever you have a grand project like that, you have a demand for what Bernard Harrison calls project-driven homogeneity. And what happens is that the Jewish people generally become the symbol of that opposition. They want everybody to get on board, and at first they say, you know, we're going to be able to get everybody on board, but then the Jewish people say, no, we're good because we have a transcendent purpose of our own that contradicts or does not support your grand scheme for humanity, and that's when they become the demonized other.
And we're going to pick up with that. I know this is like a lot, you know, and again, this isn't a discussion that's normally held in the United States. It's very new. I think in different parts of Europe, it's a fairly common conversation, but here in the United States, not so much, or even in Canada. But let's go to a break. We're going to digest that a little bit, and then when we come back, we're going to pick up with my very special guest, Dexter Van Zile.
As a scientist, I know by the time she takes her first breath, 9 billion more tons of carbon pollution will be in the air. When she takes her first steps, wildfires will have burned millions more acres she could have explored. By the time a child born today goes to college, it may be too late to leave them the world we promised. Our window to act on climate change is like watching them grow up. We blink and we miss it.
Whether it's advice on managing your anxiety or tools to help you stay grounded, Coping-19 provides a range of resources and self-care tips to help you cope with this pandemic. We can help. Find the resources that work best for you at coping-19.org.
Hello and welcome back to Bostonian Rap. My name is Rachel Miselman. I am very proud and honored to have as a very special guest Dexter Van Zile. He has a focus on Western Islamism, and we've been talking about this particular type of extremism, and it's, you know, as I continue to stress, it's very much a new conversation here in the United States. I would say all of North America. You know, so I said the United States, Canada, also Mexico.
Right.
People just don't really talk a lot about this, but we need to.
Yeah, and the reason it's easier to talk, or you know, after 9/11 or after a terror attack, it's easy to talk about jihad. But the thing is that Islamism is essentially a movement that will use the tools that Western Democrats use to govern their countries and to constrain their behavior. They will use that system of rights to basically advance their agenda. And there's an awful lot of Islamists who are hoping to and are working towards basically subverting the political order in the West without firing a shot. And the problem is that there's a fair number of, and I don't like to use the word fellow travelers, but it works, people who are essentially willing to assist them because they have kind of lost confidence in the constitutional order or even in Western civilization itself.
And I agree. And I want people to understand, so I have to keep on putting forth these qualifying statements because, my goodness, if you're in a fight for justice, you definitely want Dexter on your side. And I myself you know, I've spent a good chunk of my life, and I see my, you know, myself doing this to the day I die, to my very last breath, fighting for human rights. And this is about this conversation to couch it in I guess under a broader,
Right.
Broader, you know, under a broader banner, if I can put it like that. This is about extremism,
Right.
and we've seen an explosion of extremism from different corners. So we have Islamism, we have a resurgence. I shouldn't say resurgence. We have Nazism. So I can't say resurgence because, well, maybe I can, because, you know, we've, at different points, there has been support for the Nazi Party, but it's always been very much, something very much on the fringes,
Yeah.
and something
And the problem is
kind
if
of
you don't
underground.
confront it, if you don't confront that, if you don't stand in opposition to it, you lose your credibility on every other issue.
Well, that's it.
But one of the things that I think we should remember about Islamism is that it's losing its credibility amongst, in its region of origin. It started largely, you know, as a result of the writings of Hassan, al-Banna, and then Sayyid Qutb in Egypt, okay? And the Islamists took power under Morsi, and they were ousted, okay? And then the Islamists in Iran, okay, they are under a direct attack from the people that they're supposed to be governing, and they are, you know, there were gas attacks against girls in
horrible.
schools in Iran.
Very recently, very
Right.
recently.
But the interesting thing about this is that while Islamism in the Middle East is losing its credibility, and people are now looking around for some sort of ideology or system of governance that people will allow them to live together, there are people here in the West, and I spoke with Wasit Wasik, who is an anti-Islamist Muslim in the United Kingdom, and I interviewed him about this. And I said, you know, Wasit, you know, there are people in the Middle East. This ideology doesn't seem to be doing particularly well in the Middle East.
I mean,
and then he says, but there are people in the West that think that they can make it work. They think they can make it work
yeah,
here.
and it's you know, again, I want to draw that out, underline it for people watching at home. This is what, you know, what's going on in Iran right now, what's been going on for quite some time. You have very, very, very brave, courageous Iranians who are standing up to Islamism.
Right.
They're standing up to theocracy. They're standing up to dictatorship.
Right. And those of us who were born here in the United States, who were born in the West, okay, I think a lot of us have failed the Iranian dissident community that lives next door to us.
100%.
Because
Absolutely.
the thing is that these people, and I don't want to speak too publicly about some of the things that they have to do to keep themselves safe, because there are Iranian operatives, and I know that word operative makes, but they're essentially—
Makes it sound like you're a conspiracy
right,
theorist,
but
you're not.
But the thing is that there are institutions here in the United States and throughout Europe that are essentially beholden to Tehran, okay? There are and this is one of we're going back to this before. We have a system of nonprofits here in the United States and in the West, charities that essentially are non-government. They're generally left alone by the government.
NGOs. Non-governmental organizations.
And what happens is that outsiders, or, you know, Turkey and Iran in particular, they end up using this system. Sometimes it's mosques, sometimes it's other sort of NGOs, to basically promote Islamism and promote a false narrative about Muslims not being able to practice their faith in the West. And one of the narratives that they say is that Muslims who live in the West are basically under siege and don't have the ability to practice their faith in safety. Where in fact and I don't want to sound too truculent when I say this, but they have more rights and more safety here in the West than they do in many Muslim majority countries that their families originated from.
And what a lot of people don't understand, you know, it's not like within Islam, you know, there are different, you know, there are different movements, if I could call it that. You have the Shias, you have the Sunnis, and, you know, there have been some unbelievably vicious battles between the Shias and the Sunnis. And then you have other movements as well. And it's just important to know this. It's important to put all these pieces together.
Right.
When you have this conversation.
Right.
I think it's a conversation, again, that is very vital. If I didn't think so, I wouldn't be so eager to have you on the show and talk
Right.
about it. But I think that, I think it's important to keep on reminding people that this is a talk at its core about extremism.
Right.
And about an ideology that
it seeks to overturn the political order of the West.
That's right, yes.
And when you say that, for me it was reassuring when I saw Bassem Tibi say that, because when I first started to focus on Western Islamism, I had a gut sense that that was what was going on, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started to read a lot of the sources, and my transition from camera to the Middle East Forum was, kind of pell-mell, okay? But when I started to read this, I said, yes, he's right. And I was glad to see that Bassem Tibi had already said what I had.
And it's also, let's be frank. I mean, obviously, Muslims, every race from all over the world, different origins. But there is this idea that, ridiculous, absurd idea that if you're white, you're not a Muslim, or you can't be a Muslim. And here you are, a white man, and you're saying that you're Christian. And so it might be, well, who are you to say anything about Islamism?
Okay, well, you see, now this is the thing.
Now, I mean,
Right.
Would you say that there's been some kind of skepticism when you open up your mouth, or maybe some preconceived notions?
See, this is the thing. I grew up in the United States, and I don't have any other place to go, okay? And so you say, Dexter, you don't have a right to speak about...
Oh, I'm not...
I understand that, I know. You don't have a right to speak about Islam or Islamism. It's like, yeah, but
you're a white guy. You're
right,
a white,
yeah.
straight
yeah.
guy.
Oh, yeah,
you're
if you're
Christian,
a cisgender,
yeah.
But the thing is that I do have a right and an interest to be able to speak about how the West is going to govern itself. And I have an obligation and a right, and I think actually a calling to say, look, Western civilization, for all of its difficulties, and it has a tremendous, one of the reasons why I joined the Peace Corps in my mid-20s was for the same reason why people became communists in the 1920s and 30s. They had a feeling of privilege, they had a feeling of guilt, and they essentially, they wanted to somehow fix things, okay? Now, the Peace Corps is not the same thing as joining, aligning yourself with the Soviet Union. So I have that sense of history.
But just let me say to people at home, so, Dexter, we can touch upon this a little bit. Dexter is a person of great faith, and that's really informed the different work that he has done over the years. That's informed your passion, what you consider your calling, what is your calling, to stand up to bigotry of all kinds, but you focus, you
Right.
do tend to focus on certain types of extremism and bigotry and types of hatred more than others. But the idea is that you're very much informed, and so you have, by your faith, and you have spent the entirety of your adult life trying to give back. Well, you have, trying to give back, or trying to fight the good fight. And so you mentioned...
That's true, okay?
And you mentioned, Peace Corps, so
right.
talk more, a little bit more about that.
And I think really what it does is that it goes back to one of the things that I have concluded is that, first of all, most people generally are going to need some sort of religious belief in their life to be able to function. And they need a connection to some sort of larger transcendent purpose.
Or at least like
Right.
a belief that there's a higher power.
Right. And oftentimes what happens is that people who are born into particular faiths, they don't really have any control over the faith that they are born into. And so, and I have a fair amount of, a lot more sympathy for people as I've gotten older, for just this is the environment that they were born into. And the thing is that ultimately we have to figure out a way to live together. And historically, the United States was able to, we did Protestant, Catholic, Jew, okay? And I wrote about this, and you'll see this on our website, Focus on Western Islamism, Fighting for Peace in a Multi-Faith America. That's the title of the article. What now I want to basically broaden that so that it says Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, Baha'i, any other number of things. But in order for that to work, essentially we need to come up with a commitment to the constitutional order, the idea that we're all created equal in the mind of the Creator. And the thing is that and smart atheists will go along with at least we're all created equal. And so, but the thing is that right now Islamism is one of the most potent threats to that that sense of order and that sense of being equal before the law and before God. Because whenever you have supremacism of any type, whether it's racial supremacism or theological or religious supremacism or we are the new centurions, you know, ideological supremacism, that generally ends up basically resulting in disaster. And that, yeah.
Every time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our next break of tonight's show. When we come back, we are going to make a shift into a different type of hatred, extremism. And I do want to get in a nice little discussion about a story that you broke.
Thank you. Okay.
About an elected official right here in Suffolk County. But let's go to that break.
STEM is the discipline of hard numbers, precise, no margin for error.
Dare to forget that. Dare to have fun with it. Get weird with it. Dare to get messy, or just mess it up. Dare to program something internet-breaking, record-breaking. Dare to blow their minds. Dare to try. Dare to fail. Dare to keep daring. Dare to learn the difference between organic, sedimentary, and non-foliated metamorphic rock. Get outside, find those rocks. Dare to be homeroom famous, a high school fable. Dare to send those old STEM theories flying past the neighbor's house into outer space. And for the love of STEM, dare bigger. Dare to code, dare to invent, dare to explore, dare to STEM. Check out She Can STEM to get started.
Hello, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, thank you so much. But if you've been with us from the beginning, thank you so much. So my name is Rachel Miselman. You are watching me on Bostonian Rap. I am very honored, and I'm very happy to say that I'm very honored to have as a special guest Dexter Van Zile. He does work with a focus on Western Islamism. But he is also, as I said at the top of today's show, he's also been a steadfast friend to the Jewish community. And so this time last year, there was a lot of discussion throughout the political world here in Massachusetts, throughout the Massachusetts political space realm, about the mapping project.
Essentially, and to be honest with you.
And you were mentioned.
I was mentioned in the mapping project, and once I saw that my name was mentioned, like for my own, I have
sanity or.
Yeah, well, what happens is that I have a tendency to look at anything and figure out a way to make it exaggerate my own sense of self-importance. I was, look, here I am in the mapping project. So I basically went out of my way to just kind of ignore it. But essentially there was
it's sinister.
Yeah, there was a sinister BDS campaign that basically meant to drive Jews from the public square in the city of Boston, or not in the city of Boston, but in Massachusetts.
Well, in the city of Boston, but then,
the Metro Boston area.
The Metro Boston area.
And what it was, what it did was it basically portrayed all of these listed, first of all, a whole bunch of like law enforcement institutions and national security institutions.
And that's important.
Right. And then lumped in the Jewish community in with those institutions. And the thing is that the whole melange of that was, first of all, it was meant to incite hostility towards American, the military-industrial complex, and then lump the Jews in with that.
Yeah, and I exactly. Well, and it's always, Jews were always used as a scapegoat. And if there's something that is causing a lot of distress in any given society or community, if people, if there's a target,
right?
So we've talked a lot
Right. Right.
this, society. We've talked a lot about the police and their role, and
You see, and
the
that's
United States.
one of the-
And I have to say, I'm very disappointed that more elected officials didn't stand up and say.
Well, there were a few, okay, and I...
Not enough.
Okay, and that's going to be...
Secretary of State Bill Galvin,
Well, that's...
he did that.
He's a good guy from Brighton. That's
He's-
why. Okay, all right,
Just
all
so
right.
people know that Dexter's, he's a
All right,
Brighton boy.
Okay, well, I grew up in Westwood, but now I've lived in Brighton for the past 20 years, and
But
my friends tell me I can pass. Now, the thing that you have to understand, all right, Zocor, there's a Zocor legal group that did a report on this, and they one of the things that they suggested or stated in this report is that it looks like there might actually be some ties to the people who were involved with this report, this mapping project, and Iran. But the thing is that one of the things that I want to make clear is that on one level, this was just a regular expression of people's right to free speech, and that's a very troubling thing for me to have to say. But it's a very, I despise what they're trying to do with this report. But the thing is, I don't think we need to, and so.
And it is difficult, and I don't want to police anybody's speech, but given the
Right.
atmosphere, given the steep rise in attacks on Jewish people, on Jewish communities in Massachusetts, it is at a critical point, it's at a tipping point. And so it's, for me, the mapping project it wasn't free speech. It was an incitement to violence. And what I wanted to say is, for people who want to criticize the police, look, that's free speech. You can criticize, me, that's free speech. But I want people to understand how much our police truly do. And our police do play a role in keeping all communities safe and combating extremism of all kinds. And that must be said.
See, and this is a little
Because-
far afield from my work at the Middle East Forum, but it's something that it's informed my work since 2005. Is that whenever you want to basically delegitimize government institutions historically, one of the things that you can do is basically portray them as essentially in the pay of the Jewish community, of the Jews. And that was essentially what this mapping project was attempted to do. It wasn't just an attempt to kind of drive Jews from the public square, which, by the way, I think historically I responded to this on emotional terms, and I still do, but it's also a strategic threat to American civil society, and that's important. But what they were trying to do was to basically delegitimize the very institutions that the West or the American people use to govern themselves and defend themselves.
So, that point I definitely agree with you. So it was very much a vicious, malicious, very dangerous attack on Jewish people in the state of Massachusetts. However, there were some cherries on top. So a lot of these people that were behind it, and it was a local BDS chapter, and it's important to mention that the BDS on a national level, they distanced themselves from the mapping project. But the local chapter, a lot of these people, they're also very anti-law enforcement.
Right.
They're very anti, just the whole infrastructure we have in place, the whole political, hierarchy, infrastructure, system. And so those were the cherries on top to really kind of have a swing at them. But it was very dangerous.
Yeah, and the thing, they were naming Jewish high schools in this. And and at a certain point, it was kind of like, okay, I'm done with looking at it, but I was disgusted with it.
Well, it was hard, even if you did look at it through the lens of free speech, I found it impossible not to look at the mapping project and just say, this is truly disgusting.
Right.
But again, for me, and it's not just as a Jewish woman, but for me, it was an incitement to violence, given the already anxious atmosphere. And that's not to say that I fear for my life or I fear a verbal attack stepping out the door, but it's undeniable that there's been a steep rise in anti-Semitic incidents of different kinds.
Right. I think one of the things that we see in the West and in the United States is essentially that there are, and also is that they don't want to exercise a monopoly on force to maintain order. That was one of the things that we saw as a result of the BLM riots and the Antifa riots in many of our cities.
Sure.
And we're seeing the consequences of that. And one of the things that I'm worried about is that in order, at a certain point, people are going to basically cast about for any sort of sense of order that they get. Anything, and what'll happen is that people will start to form alliances. And if you look at focus on Western Islamism, one of the things that we are starting to worry about is the possibility of the hard right basically aligning themselves with Islamists.
Well, I mean, you already see some worrying alliances, and I just want to kind of, shift to like the last segment of the show, and I really want you to talk about this story that you broke. So you have, what I'm going to say is kind of, I don't know if you want to call it the normalization of anti-Semitism in the surrounding area, Boston surrounding area, or if it's just kind of like an ignorance, because I think that one of the issues is that people seem to think that if you're Jewish, well, you can't really be a victim of any kind of bigotry because you're in a place of privilege, right? And it's like, well, anyone can be on the receiving end of bigotry. And so, when I hear just these casual throwouts, like, these remarks being made, and I say to myself sometimes when I hear some of them, I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you serious? And people don't bat an eye. But if it were another group instead of the Jews, there would be an uproar, okay? So let's talk about the story that you broke.
Okay. A few weeks ago, or actually it was sometime in early May, I discovered through happenstance that the chief of outreach for Suffolk County District Attorney was a member of the Nation of Islam.
And so
Kevin Hayden.
Kevin Hayden.
And his chief of outreach, an individual by the name of True C. Allah, was a member of the Nation of Islam. And what had happened was that I was asking him about something else, about another case that was not prosecuted.
Sure.
And the case that I was asking him about involved a member that was a member of the Fruit of Islam. And so I said, can you give me some information? I gave the individual, mentioned his name, and I told True C. Allah, I know that he's a member of the Nation of Islam, which is not normative Islam. And at that moment, his face went blank, and I was like, And who
are you talking about now? Who are you
I was talking to True C. Allah directly.
True C. Okay.
And this was at an event in Brighton with Kevin Hayden.
And let me just make it clear to people at home. So the remarks that were made that were offensive, it's not by DA, District Attorney of Suffolk County, Kevin Hayden.
Right.
It was one of his staffers, well, who's now on leave.
Right.
Paid
and
leave.
So what happened was that this is how, and when I asked him about this other case, and he said, and his face went blank when I said that Nation of Islam is not normative Islam, I said that to basically reassure Mr. Allah that because I can assume that he was Muslim given his name. Right. And what happened was that I was like, oh my word, there's a good chance that this public official is a member of the Nation of Islam. So one of the things that we did was, my colleagues at the Middle East Forum, we started to basically find connections between him and the Nation of Islam, and then I found a number of interviews in which he basically praised Louis Farrakhan. And at that moment, I was stunned and I was kind of shocked. And the thing is I want to make it clear, maybe I'm being naive, but I would never have thought in a million years that the person who was in charge of outreach for a district attorney or would ever basically be a member of the Nation of Islam, given the things that Farrakhan has said about white people and about Jews. And
white people are devilish.
Right.
Judaism is a gutter religion.
This
is Louis Farrakhan.
And so, and the thing is that one of the things you have to understand is that True C. Allah, he had gotten a pardon for a crime that he had been convicted of, and if you can see it at the Middle East Forum's website or in the article that was published in the American Spectator. And what happened was that one of the things that was mentioned was that when he got his pardon was that he had gotten his life in order largely through the Nation of Islam. And that was in 2014, 2015. And you know, early on, you know, it would be, and the people who advocated for him to get his pardon, an awful lot of them were, for lack of a better word, white guys who were involved in law enforcement here in the state of Massachusetts, and they were advocating for him. And the thing is that given the fact that he was getting his life together, that would seem kind of reasonable.
On the face of it, that's a comeback story.
Right.
That's something that wherever you are on the political social spectrum, you can cheer, you can applaud.
And but at a certain point, then you have to say, okay, but he is now basically become he was a member of the. It looks, you know, in the interviews he talks about being a member of the Fruit of Islam, which is essentially the kind of maybe paramilitary wing of the Nation of Islam. That may not be the proper word, but it's the security force for the Nation of Islam. Mm-hmm. And he was a prominent member. And in one of the interviews that he gave, he basically, just recently, he said that it was kind of his goal to basically help promote Nation of Islam's reputation amongst public officials here in the state, which seems to be very inappropriate. So the thing is that, so I wrote about this and I basically said, look, here we have a guy who's a member of the Nation of Islam, and I kind of went soft on that because I didn't really, you know, because that's a religious community. But he went out of it.
It is a religious community.
But then he went out of his way to basically affirm Louis Farrakhan, who's quite frankly one of the worst purveyors of anti-Semitism and anti-white racism and black supremacism and black separatism in American society. So it would be one thing if he were, you know, just a member and just kind of kept it on the DL, so to speak. But no, he would, and this was a thing that was really bothersome.
He was vocal about promoting a particular figure within Nation of Islam, a figure who actually happens to be unfortunately seen as a leader by many.
Yeah, well, and he is the leader of that community.
He is.
Yeah. So, and the thing that really, I struggled with this. I was like, but at the end of the day, you cannot affirm and praise Louis Farrakhan and then tell us that you're going to keep the peace in Suffolk County.
And it's community outreach, so that's
right.
I mean, that is a very specific role.
And in the original article that I wrote is that it basically raises questions about whether or not the district attorney can actually abide by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which says that everyone is equal before the law. And if you look closely, I mean, one of the things that you will find about the Nation of Islam is that sometimes white people are able to basically participate in the Nation of Islam, but they're not really allowed to participate fully in this community, okay? And oddly enough, there are some people white people who want to affiliate because it gives them a sense of order, but they are essentially, for lack of a better word, second-class citizens. And that was the stuff that I read about the movement that was written in the 90s. So
now, of course, what we're saying right now, you know, talking about Nation of Islam and just, you know, making critical comments. And when I say critical comments, not to disparage, but to point out
and this
observations that weren't made willy-nilly.
And one of the things that I concluded is that, like, and I said earlier during this interview is that one of the problems that we have with political leaders is that oftentimes they will affiliate with Islamist leaders because it's a convenient, for lack of a better word, a convenient handle on the larger Muslim community. Okay? These are the people, if we need to be able to speak to the larger Muslim community, these are the people, but that these are extremists. This is the same, that issue in a microcosm, because what we have is essentially a political leader that's basically saying it's okay.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. So let me just kind of get right down to it. So you wrote this article,
right?
But initially, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office stood by Trucy Allah.
Right.
And when I said he has a very specific role, I mean that it's a role that allows him to use the legitimate and very important office of the Suffolk County District Attorney to purvey and disseminate a message. So you have to make sure that whoever you have in that role is someone who is committed to seeing everyone
Right.
equally. So initially, the DA's office, so this is disappointing because I have supported Kevin Hayden in the past. But initially, he supported, his office stood by Trucy Allah, but then what happened?
Well, then what happened was is that I paid attention to the Twitter feed, okay? And I didn't see any, previously Trucy Allah showed up in an awful lot of the images on the Suffolk County District Attorney's Twitter feed.
Sure.
Then what happened was is that at a certain point after the article was published in the American Spectator, he didn't show up. I said, so hey, what's the deal? Well, then I got an email back. I sent an email in and he said, oh, his status hasn't changed. Why would it change? And then just a few...
And this is an email from the district attorney's office.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Kevin Hayden's office.
Right.
Okay.
And I was like, okay. And you see, and the thing is that if this individual was somebody that was kind of like a member of some sort of white supremacist organization...
Oh, he would have been gone.
Right. And so there was kind of a double standard. So, but at this point, I kind of laid low. But then this afternoon, and to my utter disgrace, somebody from Fox News found a terrible, terrible quote from Trucy Allah that I missed, okay, that would have probably ended the controversy within hours. And if you can find it, it's on Fox News.
So DA Hayden wouldn't have been able to waffle.
Right.
He wouldn't. It
Right.
would have been okay.
But the thing that I find really bothersome is that the local media hasn't covered this. Neither the Herald, to the best of my knowledge, okay, neither the Herald nor the Globe or any of the other local TV stations.
And the article that I saw that was broken by, I'll call her a journalist, Casey Dillon. I believe she's actually has Massachusetts roots. She's from here. It's today.
Right.
It's
today.
So
And
this is actually a big thing.
Right, yeah.
And so we're getting ready to wrap up. We have like another, I think, 2 minutes or so. So tell us now, Trucy Allah, now what has the DA's office done?
Well, essentially what they've done, and I got a copy of the text, of the message myself, is that essentially they're going to investigate further.
But he's been placed on leave.
He's been placed on leave.
Administrative
Right,
leave.
right. And this should have been done within the first story. Somebody should have said, what's going on here?
And ask questions.
And ask questions and say, and that I think is really the issue. And the fact is that the people who live in Suffolk County really have to know that this is intolerable. You cannot have this level of animosity towards one community or several communities.
Jewish community,
right.
any
being
community.
legitimized by either public funds or public positions. That's just the bottom line. And so that's really what we're dealing with right now. And I think it's gut check time for the leaders of the city of Boston and the larger state of Massachusetts.
And his remarks were made against what community in particular?
Jews.
Jews, yeah. So, again, I don't think DA Hayden is a bad person, but he needs to make it clear that in his capacity as DA that he's going to protect all communities equally, and that has to flow, that has to be the same idea, mindset that is embodied by all his staff.
Right, right.
How can people find out more about you,
They
quickly?
They can go to the website. Our URL is islamism.news, islamism.news, and they can also go to the website for the Middle East Forum.
Middle East Forum, okay. Dexter, thank you so much. And for those of you who tuned in tonight, thank you so much more, but not much more. I look forward to hanging out with you next time. Bye-bye for now.